When I opened the safe in my bedroom that morning, everything my husband left me was gone, and in its place sat a single folded note that read, in neat, unfamiliar handwriting, "It was never yours." I stood there longer than I cared to admit, my hand still resting on the cold metal door, as if the contents might reappear if I didn't move too quickly. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles in after a long Illinois winter morning, when even the furnace seems to hum softer than usual. My name is Margaret Whitmore. I'm 72 years old, and until that moment, I believed I understood exactly where I stood in my own home. I closed the safe slowly, then opened it again, more deliberately this time, counting the empty shelves as though I might have misremembered. The velvet tray, where my husband kept my grandmother's diamond brooch, was gone. The envelope of municipal bonds we had stored for decades was gone. Even the small cedar box that held his gold watch, the one engraved back in 1968, had vanished without a trace. I reached into the safe and touched the back panel, running my fingers along the cool steel, checking for some hidden compartment I might have forgotten about. Nothing. Just that note, folded in half like it belonged there. I carried it downstairs to the kitchen, where the coffee maker had just finished brewing, the scent of dark roast filling the room. I poured myself a cup, though my hands weren't entirely steady, and set the note flat against the granite countertop. "It was never yours." I said the words out loud this time, testing how they sounded in the open air. They didn't sound confused. They sounded certain. That's what unsettled me most. I had lived in this house for 38 years. My late husband, Robert, installed that safe himself, right after Daniel went off to college. For peace of mind, he'd told me, smiling as he spun the combination. And you're the only other person who knows the code. I took a sip of coffee and forced myself to think through the facts instead of the feeling. The safe hadn't been forced open. There were no scratches, no signs of damage. Whoever emptied it had either known the combination or had taken the time to get it properly unlocked. I glanced toward the staircase, toward the second floor where Daniel and Claire had been staying for the past 3 months. "Mom, you shouldn't be rattling around this place alone," Daniel had said after the funeral, standing in this very kitchen, his voice softer than usual. "Let's help out for a while." Claire had smiled beside him, one hand resting lightly on his arm. "We'll make things easier for you, Margaret. You've done enough for everyone else." At the time, it had sounded like kindness. I picked up the note again, turning it over, checking for anything, an imprint, a smudge, something that might give it context. The paper was from my own house. I recognized the stationery from the drawer by the phone. That meant whoever wrote it hadn't brought it with them. They had taken the time to sit down, to write this message, and to leave it where I would find it. I walked to the base of the stairs and looked up. "Daniel," I called, keeping my voice even. No answer. A moment later, I heard movement upstairs, footsteps slow and measured. Then Claire's voice, calm as ever. "We're coming down," she said. I folded the note carefully and held it in my hand, feeling the weight of it, or maybe the lack of weight where something else should have been. As their footsteps approached, I realized something that made my chest tighten, not with panic, but with clarity. Whoever emptied that safe didn't just know the combination. They knew exactly when I wouldn't check it. And that wasn't a stranger's knowledge. That was someone who had been watching me closely for a very long time. Claire came down the stairs first, one hand lightly brushing the banister, her expression composed in a way that would have seemed reassuring if I had not just been standing in front of an empty safe. Daniel followed a step behind her, already dressed in a pressed button-down shirt, his car keys in hand as if he had somewhere important to be. "Morning, Mom," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek, though his eyes flicked briefly toward my hand, toward the folded note I had not bothered to hide. "You are up early." I did not return the gesture. I stayed where I was at the base of the stairs and held the note out slightly between my fingers. "Daniel, Claire," I said evenly, "I need to ask you both something before you go anywhere." Claire tilted her head, her smile polite, measured. "Of course. Is everything all right?" I watched her closely as I spoke. "I opened the safe upstairs this morning," I said. "Everything inside is gone." There was a pause, small but noticeable, like the moment before a glass tips off the edge of table. Daniel's grip tightened on his keys. Claire's smile did not disappear, but it shifted just enough to feel practiced. Gone, Daniel repeated. What do you mean, gone? I unfolded the paper and held it out so they could see the words. I mean, this is all that was left. Claire stepped closer, taking the note from my hand without hesitation. Her eyes scanned it once, then she let out a soft breath, almost like a quiet laugh that did not quite reach her eyes. Margaret, she said gently, you probably misplaced things. After everything you have been through, it would not be unusual. I did not move. I did not misplace a safe, I replied. Daniel shifted his weight, glancing between us. Mom, maybe we should sit down and talk this through, he said. There might be a simple explanation. Then give me one, I said, my voice still calm, though I could feel something tightening beneath it. Claire folded the note neatly, aligning the edges as if it were just another piece of household clutter, and handed it back to me. Have you had anyone in the house recently? She asked. Cleaning services, contractors, anyone like that? No, I said. Have you? She smiled again, the same careful expression. Of course not. Daniel cleared his throat. I actually stopped by the bank yesterday, he said quickly, as if offering something helpful. Just to look over some of Dad's documents. You know, to make sure everything is in order. I turned my head slightly toward him. The bank, I repeated. Why would you need to do that without telling me? He hesitated, just for a moment. I do not want to worry you, he said. You have had enough on your plate. I studied his face, the familiar lines that I had known since he was a boy, now carrying something else I could not quite name. Claire stepped in smoothly, placing a light hand on his arm. Daniel has just been trying to help, she said. We both have. This house, the finances, all of it can be overwhelming. It might be time to start thinking about simplifying things. I let that word settle in the air. Simplifying. It sounded tidy, harmless, almost generous, but it did not explain the empty safe. I walked past them into the kitchen, setting the note back down on the counter next to my coffee. The morning light came through the window over the sink, catching on the polished surface where I had just wiped it clean. Everything looked exactly as it always had, which made the absence upstairs feel even sharper. Daniel, I said, turning back to him, when you went to the bank yesterday, did you access the safety deposit box tied to your father's account? His expression changed, not dramatically, but enough. Claire's hand tightened slightly on his arm. He nodded once. Yes, he said. I did. I held his gaze. And what exactly did you take out of it? The silence that followed was longer this time, heavier, and when Claire finally spoke, her voice was still calm, still controlled, but there was something underneath it now, something firmer. Margaret, she said, maybe we should all take a breath before we start making assumptions. I picked up the note again, feeling the crease where she had folded it. I'm not making assumptions, I said quietly. I'm asking questions. Daniel looked at Claire, then back at me, and for the first time that morning, he did not answer right away. That was when I realized this was no longer just about what was missing from the safe. It was about something they already knew I had not discovered yet, and the way they were choosing their words told me they were deciding, in real time, how much of it to hide. Daniel finally exhaled and set his keys down on the kitchen counter with a soft clink, the kind of sound that usually meant he was settling in for a conversation he could not avoid. Mom, he said, running a hand over the back of his neck, I did not take anything that was not already part of Dad's estate. I just reviewed some things. Claire remained beside him, her posture relaxed, but her eyes stayed on me, steady and assessing, as if she were measuring how much I understood. I pulled out a chair at the kitchen table and sat down, not because I felt weak, but because I wanted them to see I was not going anywhere. Then let us review it together, I said. Right now. Claire stepped forward before Daniel could answer. Margaret, legal matters are rarely that simple, she said. There are timelines, processes. Daniel has been trying to take care of those details, so you do not have to. I folded my hands on the table, feeling the familiar grain of the wood beneath my fingers. This was the same table where I had helped Daniel with his homework, where Robert had read the Sunday paper every week for decades, where we had signed documents together after we bought this house. That memory surfaced clearly, not as comfort, but as something sharper. Robert had always insisted on explaining every paper before either of us signed anything. "We do not sign what we do not understand," he used to say, tapping the edge of the document with his pen. I looked up at Daniel. "Do you remember what your father used to say about paperwork?" I asked. He hesitated, then nodded slightly. "Yes," he said. "Of course I do." "Then help me understand something," I continued. 3 weeks after his funeral, you and Claire brought me a stack of documents right here to this table. You said it was routine. Property updates, insurance adjustments. Do you remember that? Claire's expression did not change, but Daniel's shoulders stiffened. "We were trying to keep things organized," he said. "There were a lot of loose ends." I leaned forward just a little. "And you needed me to sign those papers quickly," I said. "You told me the county deadlines were strict, that if I did not sign, things could get complicated." Claire stepped in smoothly. "That was true," she said. "Cook County has very specific filing requirements. We were helping you avoid unnecessary delays." I held her gaze. "Then you will not mind if I see copies of everything I signed." For the first time, Claire did not answer immediately. It was only a second, maybe less, but it was enough. Daniel glanced at her, then back at me. "We can get those," he said. "They are probably in my office upstairs." I nodded once. "Good. Let's get them now." Claire's hand tightened slightly on the back of Daniel's chair. "Daniel has a conference call in 15 minutes, she said. "This might not be the best time." I stood up slowly, pushing the chair back with a soft scrape against the floor. "I've been very patient about timing," I said. "This morning, I opened a safe that has not been empty in 38 years. I think this is exactly the right time." The room fell quiet again, but this time it felt different. Not uncertain, not confused. Structured, like the beginning of something that was finally taking shape. Daniel looked at Claire, and whatever passed between them was silent, but clear enough that he picked up his keys again, then set them back down. "Okay," he said. "I will grab the files." He turned and headed toward the stairs, his footsteps slower than before. Claire did not follow him. She stayed where she was, watching me with that same composed expression. "Margaret," she said softly, "I hope you trust that everything we have done has been in your best interest." I met her eyes and let a small, polite smile settle on my face. "I'm sure you believe that," I said. "The question is whether I do." She held my gaze for a moment longer, then gave a slight nod, as if acknowledging a shift neither of us needed to name. When Daniel's footsteps reached the second floor, I turned my attention back to the note in my hand, smoothing it out against the table again. The paper was ordinary, but the message was not. And now, for the first time, it felt less like a mystery and more like a warning. Because if those documents upstairs said what I was beginning to suspect they did, then the safe was only the first thing I had lost, and the next thing they planned to take might be something I could not simply replace. Daniel came back down the stairs carrying a slim gray folder, the kind you get from a law office or a bank, with a metal fastener bent slightly from being opened too many times. He placed it on the kitchen table between us, but he did not sit down right away. "These are copies," he said. "Just so you know." I pulled the folder toward me and opened it without asking permission. The first page was a property transfer document, stamped with the seal of Cook County and a date that matched exactly what I had remembered, 3 weeks after Robert's funeral. My name was there, printed clearly at the top. Beneath it, in blue ink, was my signature. I recognized the shape of it instantly, the way the M dipped slightly lower than it should when my hand was tired. But the line beneath it stopped me cold. "Transfer of primary residence to Daniel Whitmore," I read aloud. The words felt foreign in my mouth, like they belonged to someone else's life. Daniel shifted his weight again. "Mom, that was part of consolidating the estate," he said. "It simplifies things long term." I flipped to the next page. Another document, then another. Each one bore my signature. Each one moved something, assets, accounts, ownership, quietly, efficiently away from me. "And this," I said, holding up a page with a notary stamp, "this as I acknowledged and understood all terms." Claire stepped closer, resting her fingertips lightly on the back of my chair. "You did," she said. "We went through everything with you." I looked up at her. "Did we?" I asked, because I do not remember anyone explaining that I was signing over my home. She met my gaze without flinching. "Margaret, you were grieving," she said, her tone still gentle, still controlled. We try to make it as easy as possible for you. Sometimes too many details can be overwhelming. I let that sit for a moment, then turn another page. This one was different. It was not a transfer. It was an authorization form, granting Daniel limited control over certain financial accounts. But the date on it was not from 3 weeks ago. It was from 2 days ago. I felt something shift, not just in my chest, but in the room itself. Daniel, I said slowly, tapping the date with my finger, why is this signed this week? He stepped closer now, his voice tighter than before. That is just temporary access, he said, in case anything needs to be handled quickly. Bills, taxes, maintenance. I looked back down at the page. The notary seal was fresh, the ink darker, sharper. And then I saw it, the witness signature at the bottom. Not a bank employee, not an attorney. Claire Whitmore. I lifted the page and held it up between us. You witnessed this? I asked. Claire nodded once. Yes, she said. Daniel signed it in front of me. I lowered the paper slightly, my eyes moving from her to Daniel. And where was I? I asked. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again, as if the answer had slipped just out of reach. Claire stepped in before he could respond. Margaret, you were resting, she said. You have been under a lot of stress. Daniel handled this, so you would not have to. I set the document back down on the table, aligning it carefully with the others. The edges matched too neatly, like pieces of a plan that had been arranged long before I ever opened that safe. So let me make sure I understand, I said, my voice steady. 3 weeks ago, I signed away my house without realizing it. And 2 days ago, my son gave himself control over my remaining accounts while I was resting. Neither of them answered immediately. The silence stretched, but this time it did not feel like uncertainty. It felt like confirmation. I closed the folder slowly, pressing my palm flat against it. Daniel, I said, who else has seen these documents? He hesitated again, and that hesitation told me more than any explanation could have. Claire's expression did not change, but there was a stillness to her now, a quiet readiness. Our attorney has copies, she said, and the filings are already in process. I nodded once, absorbing that. Already in process. That meant this was not a discussion. It was a timeline I had been placed into without my consent. I slid the folder back toward Daniel. Then I think it is time I speak to that attorney myself, I said. Claire's lips curved into a faint, almost sympathetic smile. Of course, she said. We can arrange that. I picked up the note from the counter again, folding it along the same crease she had made earlier. No, I said quietly. I will arrange it. I turned toward the hallway, already reaching for my purse on the side table. And as I did, one thought settled clearly into place. If they had already filed these documents, then whatever was taken from the safe was not just a theft. It was evidence. And the fact that they removed it meant there was something in that safe they could not afford for me to see. I picked up my purse from the side table and slipped the note inside, folding it carefully as if it were something fragile, even though the damage it represented had already been done. The house felt different now, not because anything had physically changed, but because I could see it more clearly. The framed photos along the hallway, the polished wood floors, the coat rack by the front door where Daniel had hung his jacket just minutes ago. None of it felt uncertain anymore. It felt accounted for. Claimed. Margaret, Claire's voice came from behind me, calm and measured. You do not need to rush into anything. We can sit down this afternoon and go over everything with the attorney together. I turned halfway toward her, my hand resting on the strap of my purse. I appreciate the offer, I said, but I think I will hear it better without an audience. Daniel let out a slow breath, stepping forward. Mom, that is not fair, he said. We have been trying to help you keep things stable. I studied him for a moment, noticing how carefully he chose his words now, how every sentence seemed to pass through Claire before it reached me. Stable for who? I asked. Neither of them answered that directly. Instead, Claire moved closer to the kitchen counter and picked up her phone. If you're going to contact the attorney, she said, it would be best to coordinate. There are ongoing filings, and timing matters. I watched her thumb move across the screen, quick, efficient. Then she looked up at me again. Actually, she added, We already have a meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning. 10 o'clock. It would make more sense for you to come with us then. That was new. You scheduled a meeting without telling me, I said. We were going to, Daniel replied quickly. We just wanted everything set first. I walked past him into the living room, my steps slow but deliberate. The morning light stretched across the carpet, catching the edge of Robert's old armchair, the one he refused to replace even after the upholstery started to fade. I placed my purse on the coffee table and turned back to them. Cancel it, I said. Claire shook her head slightly, not dismissive, just firm. That is not really an option at this stage, she said. The attorney has already begun processing the documents. Delays could complicate things. There was again. Complicate. A word that sounded neutral, but carried weight when used at the right moment. I took a step closer, closing the distance between us just enough to make the space feel intentional. What exactly becomes complicated? I asked. Claire held my gaze. Ownership transitions, she said. Account access. Tax implications. It is all interconnected. Daniel shifted beside her. Mom, we're just trying to avoid unnecessary problems, he added. I nodded slowly, letting that settle. And if I decide I do not agree with these transitions, I asked. Claire's expression remained composed, but her answer came a fraction faster this time. Then we will need to address that legally, she said. But until then, the filings continue. The words were polite, but the meaning was clear. Things were moving forward whether I participated or not. I turned back toward the front door, reaching for my coat from the rack. The fabric felt heavier than usual as I slipped it on, as if the weight of the morning had settled into it. Behind me, Daniel's voice softened. Mom, you do not have to leave right now, he said. We can figure this out together. I paused with my hand on the doorknob and glanced over my shoulder. That depends on what you think there is left to figure out, I said. Claire stepped forward one last time. Margaret, she said, her tone still calm, still controlled. You should be careful about making decisions based on incomplete information. I met her eyes just for a moment. Then I suppose it is time I completed it, I replied. I opened the door, the cool air from outside brushing against my face as I stepped onto the front porch. The neighborhood looked exactly the same as it always had. Quiet, well-kept, predictable. But as I walked down the driveway toward my car, one detail from the documents upstairs kept replaying in my mind. The authorization form, the date, the witness signature. Because if Daniel had signed that form 2 days ago while I was resting, then someone had needed me out of the way long enough to make it happen, and I had a growing suspicion about exactly when that might have been. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment before turning the key, my hands resting lightly on the steering wheel as the engine hummed to life. The digital clock on the dashboard read 9:18 a.m., and for the first time that morning, I allowed myself to stop reacting and start thinking, not about what had been taken, but about what they had assumed I would not notice. I pulled out of the driveway slowly, the tires crunching against the gravel at the edge before meeting the smooth pavement of our quiet suburban street. Instead of heading straight toward the law office Claire had mentioned, I turned left at the corner, then right at the next stop sign, taking a route that had nothing to do with them. 10 minutes later, I pulled into the parking lot of the Chase Bank branch on Maple Avenue, the same one Robert and I had used for years. The building looked unchanged, brick exterior, glass doors, the American flag out front moving gently in the morning breeze. But stepping inside felt different now, like I was walking into a place that might finally answer something instead of obscure it. A young teller greeted me with a practiced smile. Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you today? I need to review access log for my accounts, I said, and I would like to speak with someone about recent activity on any boxes or authorizations tied to Robert Whitmore. She nodded and gestured toward a row of desks. Let me get a banker for you. It might take a few minutes. I took a seat, placing my purse on my lap, my fingers resting lightly over the note inside, as if it were a reminder of why I was here. A man in his early 40s approached shortly after, introducing himself as Michael Harris, branch manager. He shook my hand politely and sat across from me. Mrs. Whitmore, what seems to be the concern? I did not waste time softening it. I believe there have been changes made to my accounts and assets without my full understanding, I said. I need a complete record of who accessed what and when. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. We can certainly look into that, he said. Do you have identification? I handed him my driver's license, watching as he typed into his computer, his expression shifting from neutral to slightly more focused. All right, he said after a moment. I can see that your son, Daniel Whitmore, has authorized access to several accounts as of 2 days ago. Yes, I said. I am aware of that part. He clicked again, scrolling through something on his screen. There is also activity on a safety deposit box linked to your late husband's estate, he added. That was accessed yesterday afternoon at 2:14 p.m. The number settled into place immediately. Who accessed it? I asked. Daniel Whitmore, he said. In one moment, he leaned closer to the screen. There was a secondary signature required. It appears the access was co-signed. I felt my grip tighten slightly on the edge of the desk. By whom? He turned the monitor slightly so I could see the line. Claire Whitmore. The name sat there in clean, typed letters, followed by a digital confirmation stamp. I nodded once, slowly, as if this was exactly what I had expected, even though seeing it written down made it harder to ignore. What was removed from that box? I asked. Michael hesitated. We do not track the specific contents, he said. However, there is a record of declared items for insurance purposes. If those were updated or closed out, we can review that. Please do, I said. He clicked again, navigating through another set of records. It looks like several items were marked as transferred, he said. Jewelry, bonds, and one sealed document packet. My attention sharpened immediately. What kind of document packet? He shook his head slightly. It is listed as estate addendum, confidential. That is all the description we have. I leaned back in my chair, letting that information settle into place. The safe at home had been emptied. The deposit box had been accessed the day before. And somewhere between those two actions, a sealed document tied to Robert's estate had been moved. Not misplaced. Not forgotten. Moved. Mr. Harris, I said, my voice steady. Can you print me a copy of all access logs and declarations tied to that box over the past 30 days? He nodded. Of course. As he stood to retrieve the documents, I reached into my purse and touched the folded note again, feeling the crease beneath my fingers. For the first time since this morning, the message on that paper no longer felt like the center of the problem. It felt like a distraction. Because if there was a sealed estate addendum that had been removed just hours before I discovered the safe was empty, then whatever was written inside that packet was important. Enough for them to hide before I even knew it existed, and I had a quiet, growing certainty that finding out what was in that document was the one thing they were counting on me never doing. Michael returned with a neatly clipped stack of printed documents and placed them in front of me, the top page already highlighting the access timestamps in bold. These are the last 30 days, he said, everything tied to the box and related accounts. I nodded my thanks and began flipping through the pages, not rushing, letting each line settle into place instead of blur together. The entries were precise, dates, times, authorization codes, but what mattered was the pattern. Daniel's name appeared repeatedly over the past week, not just once or twice, but in a sequence that suggested preparation rather than urgency. Then Claire's name appeared beside his on two specific entries, both tied to the deposit box. One yesterday, one 3 days earlier. I tapped the earlier date with my finger. What was accessed here? I asked. Michael leaned slightly over the desk to check. That entry corresponds to a document verification request, he said. It looks like something was reviewed, but not removed at that time. Reviewed first. Removed later. That was not impulsive. That was deliberate. I turned the page, scanning further down, and that was when I saw something that had not been mentioned yet. A notation at the bottom of the log. Third-party legal inquiry, pending. I looked up. What does this mean? Michael adjusted his glasses slightly. That indicates an external attorney has requested confirmation of certain assets tied to the estate, he explained. It is usually part of preparing updated filings or transfers. Which attorney? I asked. He clicked a few keys, then read from the screen. Keller and Brightman Law Group. The name landed differently than everything else that morning. It was not the name Claire had mentioned. I kept my expression neutral. And when was this request made? 5 days ago, he said. I leaned back slightly, letting that timeline settle. 5 days ago, an attorney I had never heard of began asking about Robert's estate. 3 days ago, Daniel and Claire reviewed a sealed document. Yesterday, they removed it. And this morning, I found an empty safe and a note telling me it had never been mine. That was not confusion. That was coordination. I gathered the pages into a neat stack and slid them back into alignment, the way Robert used to do when he wanted to keep control of a conversation without raising his voice. Mr. Harris, I said, is there any record of who authorized that legal inquiry? He checked again. It appears to be tied to the authorized account holder, he said. Daniel Whitmore. I nodded once. Of course it was. But that still left one problem. They had moved the document, but they had not eliminated the trail. Not entirely. I stood up, collecting the papers into my purse. You have been very helpful, I said. If anything else changes on these accounts, I would like to be notified directly. We can set up alerts, he said. I will make sure you are the primary contact. That was the first small correction of the morning, and I felt it immediately. Not dramatic, not visible, but real. Thank you, I said. As I walked back out into the parking lot, the late morning sun had climbed higher, warming the pavement beneath my feet. I paused beside my car and took out my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found a number I had not used in years. Susan Keller, Robert's old attorney. Not Keller and Brightman, just Keller. I pressed call and held the phone to my ear, listening to the steady ring. When she answered, her voice was older but unmistakable. Susan Keller speaking. I allowed myself a small breath before responding. Susan, this is Margaret Whitmore, I said. I believe someone is using my husband's estate without my knowledge, and I need to know exactly what was supposed to be in that sealed addendum. There was a pause on the other end, longer than a greeting, shorter than hesitation. Then her tone shifted, becoming sharper, more precise. Margaret, she said, that document was never meant to be accessed without you present. I closed my eyes briefly, just long enough to steady the realization. Then I think it is time we correct that, I said. As I ended the call and looked back at the bank behind me, one thing became clear in a way it had not been before. They had taken something they thought would protect them. But if that document required me to be present, then removing it without me was not just a step in their plan. It was a mistake, and mistakes leave openings. I sat in my car for a moment longer after the call ended, my phone still in my hand, Susan Keller's words echoing with a clarity that cut through everything else that morning. That document was never meant to be accessed without you present. It was not just a detail. It was a line they had crossed. I placed the phone carefully into my purse, right beside the folded note, and started the engine. This time, I did not hesitate about where I was going. When I pulled back into my driveway 20 minutes later, Daniel's car was still there, but Claire's was gone. That in itself told me something had shifted. Either she had somewhere to be, or she believed the situation at home was already under control. I stepped inside the house and closed the door behind me with a quiet click. The air felt still but not empty. Intentional. Daniel was in the living room, standing near the window, his phone pressed to his ear. He lowered his voice when he saw me. I will call you back, he said quickly, ending the call before the other person could respond. I set my purse down on the side table, taking my time, watching him the same way I had seen him watch others in business meetings, measured, cautious. Busy morning, I said. He forced a small smile. Just following up on a few things, he replied. Trying to stay ahead of everything. I nodded once, then walked past him toward the dining room, where the gray folders still sat on the table exactly where we had left it. I opened it again, not because I needed to reread it, but because I wanted him to see that I would. I spoke with an attorney, I said casually. Daniel stiffened slightly behind me. Already, he asked. That was fast. I turned a page slowly. It seemed necessary. He stepped closer now, his tone tightening just enough to reveal something underneath. Mom, you really should have waited. We already have representation handling this. Bringing in someone else could complicate things. There was again. Complicate. I looked up at him. I think we may have different definitions of that word, he said. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Look, I know this feels sudden, he said, but everything, Claire, and I have done has been about making sure things are secure. You do not need to worry about the details anymore. I closed the folder and rested my hand on top of it. That is an interesting statement, I said, because from where I am sitting, the details are exactly what matter. Before he could respond, the front door opened, and Claire stepped inside, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. She carried a slim leather portfolio under her arm, the kind professionals bring to meetings they expect to control. "Margaret, you are back," she said smoothly, as if nothing had shifted since I left. "That is good. I was hoping we could go over a few things together." She set the portfolio down on the kitchen counter and opened it, pulling out a set of neatly printed documents. "I stopped by the attorney's office," she continued. "We have updated drafts reflecting the next steps. It will make everything much cleaner once these are signed." I walked into the kitchen, my eyes moving from the documents to her face. "You went to the attorney's office this morning?" I said. "Yes," she replied without hesitation. There were a few items that needed to be expedited. Daniel stepped beside her, glancing down at the papers. "This will streamline everything," he added. Claire slid one of the documents toward me across the counter. The paper was crisp, the print sharp, the signature line already marked with a small adhesive tab. "If you could review and sign here," she said, her tone polite, almost encouraging, "we can finalize the remaining transfers today." I did not reach for the pen she had placed beside it. Instead, I read the heading at the top of the page: Full Asset Consolidation and Irrevocable Transfer Authorization. I let the words settle before I spoke. "Irrevocable," I repeated. Claire nodded slightly. "It simply means the process cannot be reversed once completed," she said. "It protects everyone involved." I looked at her, then at Daniel, then back at the document. "Everyone," I said, "except the person signing it." The room went quiet again, but this time the silence carried a different weight. Not uncertainty, not hesitation, pressure. Claire's expression did not change, but her voice lowered just enough to feel more direct. "Margaret," she said, "these decisions cannot be delayed indefinitely. There are legal timelines we have to respect." I met her gaze, letting a small pause stretch between us. "Then I suppose we should make sure everything is fully understood before we respect them," I said. I pushed the document back toward her, untouched. "I will not be signing anything today." Daniel shifted beside her, his voice rising slightly. "Mom, you are making this harder than it needs to be." I turned to him, calm, steady. "No," I said. "I am making it visible." Claire closed the portfolio slowly, her fingers precise, controlled. "Very well," she said. "But understand this, Margaret. Once filings move forward, there are consequences to stepping outside the process." I picked up my purse again, feeling the weight of the papers inside, the logs, the names, the timeline they had not expected me to see. "I'm counting on that," I replied. And as I walked past them toward the stairs, one realization settled clearly into place. They believed they were accelerating the process to secure everything before I could interfere. What they did not realize was that by rushing, they had just given me exactly what I needed to stop them, and the next step would determine whether they understood that before it was too late. I did not go upstairs immediately. Instead, I paused halfway down the hallway, just out of sight of the kitchen, and let the silence settle around me. I could still hear them, Claire's voice low and controlled, Daniel's sharper, more uncertain. I did not need to catch every word. The tone was enough. They were adjusting, recalculating. That meant I had shifted something. I continued up the stairs at a normal pace, not rushing, not hesitating, and went straight into the guest bedroom where I had been staying since the funeral. The bed was still neatly made, the quilt folded at the corners the way I had always done it, but now the room felt less like a refuge and more like a temporary position. I closed the door behind me and reached into my purse, pulling out the stack of bank records Michael had printed. I laid them out across the dresser, smoothing each page flat, aligning them edge to edge until the sequence was clear. Dates, times, names, patterns. Then I took out my phone and opened the voice memo app, setting it on the dresser within reach. Not hidden, not obvious, just present. I pressed record. A small red line began to move across the screen. "All right," I said quietly, testing the sound. "Clear enough." I slipped the phone into the pocket of my cardigan and stepped back into the hallway. The house carried sound easily, always had. Robert used to joke that you could hear a whisper from one end to the other if you knew where to stand. I stopped just before the top of the stairs, where the angle opened toward the kitchen below. Claire's voice drifted up first. "She spoke to someone," she said. I could tell by the way she phrased it. Daniel responded, his voice lower, tighter. "So what does that mean?" "It means we move forward," Claire said. "We do not give her time to build a case." There was a pause, then the sound of paper sliding across the counter. "The final authorization needs to be signed today," she continued. "If not, we proceed with what we already have on file." I leaned slightly against the wall, steady listening. Daniel exhaled. "And if she refuses completely? Then we rely on the documents already executed," Claire said. "Ownership has been transferred. Account control is in place. At that point, it becomes a matter of enforcement, not permission." I let those words settle, each one fitting neatly into the pattern I had already seen in the bank records. Enforcement, not permission. That was the shift they were counting on. I turned and walked back into the bedroom, closing the door softly behind me. The phone in my pocket was still recording, capturing every word, every pause, every certainty in her voice. I took it out and set it back on the dresser, letting the recording continue as I reached for the gray folder from earlier, which I had brought upstairs without comment. I opened it again, flipping directly to the authorization form dated 2 days ago. Then I placed one of the bank logs beside it, aligning the timestamps with the moment Daniel and Claire had accessed the deposit box. Side by side, the sequence became undeniable. They had prepared, verified, removed, and then secured control, all within a narrow window when they believed I would not question anything. I picked up a pen from the dresser and circled the dates, not out of habit, but out of intention. This was no longer about understanding what had happened. It was about showing it clearly in a way that could not be dismissed. My phone vibrated lightly against the wood, signaling a new message. I glanced down. It was from an unknown number, but the preview showed just enough to recognize the sender. Keller Law Office. I opened it. "Margaret, I have reviewed preliminary notes. The estate addendum contains conditions that override standard transfers. We need to meet in person as soon as possible." I read the message twice, then set the phone down carefully. Override. That was the word that mattered. Whatever was in that sealed document did not just explain what they had taken. It had the power to change it. I walked to the window and looked out over the front yard, where Daniel's car still sat in the driveway, unmoved, as if nothing had shifted at all. Behind me, the recording continued quietly, capturing the house as it breathed, as it held its secrets a little longer. I turned back to the dresser, gathered the papers into a neat stack, and slipped them back into my purse. For the first time that day, I was not trying to catch up to what they had done. I was ahead of it, and as I reached for the door, one thought settled firmly into place. If that addendum could override everything they'd already put in motion, then the question was no longer whether I could stop them. It was whether I would let them go far enough to make the fall impossible to deny. I stepped out of the bedroom with my purse in hand and walked down the stairs at a steady pace, not hiding my movement this time. The house felt different now, not because of anything visible, but because I was no longer trying to understand it from the outside. I was inside it again, fully aware. Claire and Daniel were still in the kitchen, the leather portfolio open, the unsigned document resting exactly where she had placed it earlier. Claire looked up first. "Margaret," she said, her tone composed, "have you had a chance to reconsider?" I walked straight past her to the counter, setting my purse down beside the papers. "I have had a chance to clarify a few things," I said. Daniel shifted slightly, watching me more carefully now. "What kind of things?" he asked. I reached into my purse and pulled out the stack of bank records, placing them flat on the counter between us. "The kind that come with timestamps," I replied. Claire's eyes moved to the papers, then back to me. "Bank records can be misleading without proper context," she said smoothly. I nodded. "Then let us give them context," I said. I slid one page forward, tapping the line with my finger. Yesterday, 2:14 p.m., the safety deposit box tied to Robert's estate was accessed, co-signed by both of you. Daniel's jaw tightened. Claire did not react outwardly. We already explained that, she said. Routine review. I slid another page forward. 3 days earlier, same box. Document verification. Same signatures. I paused, then added the authorization form on top of the stack. And 2 days ago, Daniel, you signed for control over multiple accounts while I was resting. Witnessed by Claire. The air in the room shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly, but enough. Daniel looked at Claire again, this time not for guidance, but for alignment. Mom, you're piecing things together without understanding the process, he said. I met his eyes. No, I said, I'm understanding the sequence. Claire closed the portfolio slowly, her movements precise. Margaret, she said, her voice lower now, more direct. Even if you question the order of events, the filings are valid. Ownership has already been transferred. That is not something that can simply be undone because you feel uncertain. I let a small pause settle before I responded. That depends on what was in the sealed addendum, I said. The words landed differently this time. Claire's expression held, but something behind it shifted, just enough to register. Daniel frowned slightly. What addendum? He asked. I did not look at him. I kept my attention on Claire. The one that was removed from the deposit box yesterday, I said. The one that, according to the bank, was marked confidential. Claire's silence stretched just a fraction too long. Then she spoke carefully. There are many documents associated with an estate, she said. Not all of them are relevant to the current process. I leaned forward slightly, resting my hand on the counter. This one is, I said, because I spoke with Susan Keller this morning. That name landed harder. Daniel straightened. Claire's eyes sharpened, not in panic, but in calculation. Susan Keller? Daniel repeated. Dad's old attorney? I nodded once. She confirmed that the addendum was not meant to be accessed without me present, I said, which means whatever is in it was important enough to require my involvement. Claire's voice remained controlled, but there was a new edge beneath it. Margaret, you are drawing conclusions from incomplete information, she said. I held her gaze. Then I suppose we should complete it, I replied. I reached into my purse again and took out my phone, placing on the counter between us. The screen was dark, but I knew exactly what it held. Not yet. Not here. Daniel looked between us, his voice quieter now. Mom, what are you trying to do? He asked. I turned to him, my tone steady. I'm trying to understand why you both moved that document before I even knew it existed, I said. Claire stepped forward, closing the distance slightly. We're trying to protect what has already been put in motion, she said. I nodded slowly. That is what I thought, I said. I picked up the unsigned document she had prepared and held it for a moment, reading the title again. Irrevocable. Then I set it back down, untouched. We will meet with the attorney, I said. All of us. Claire's eyes narrowed, just slightly. That was already scheduled for tomorrow, she said. I shook my head. No, Sylvia. We will meet today. Daniel blinked. Today. I nodded. This afternoon, I said. I already spoke with Susan Keller. She's expecting us. Claire's posture stilled, her control tightening rather than slipping. That is not the firm handling these filings, she said. It is now, I answered. The room held that moment, balanced on something neither of them had planned for. Then Claire gave a small, measured nod. All right, she said, if that is what you want. I met her gaze, steady. It is, I said. And as I picked up my purse again, I knew the next step would not be about documents or timelines anymore. It would be about what was written in that addendum, and whether they realized before we walked into that office that it might not say what they needed it to say. The drive to Susan Keller's office took just under 20 minutes, but no one spoke for most of it. Daniel sat in the passenger's seat, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, while Claire sat in the back, her posture straight, her silence deliberate. I drove. I did not rush, and I did not hesitate. When we pulled into the small parking lot of the law office, a modest brick building tucked between a pharmacy and a dry cleaner, Claire glanced at the sign out front. This is not Keller and Brightman, she said quietly. No, I replied, turning off the engine. It is not. We stepped inside together, the soft chime of the doorbell echoing faintly in the quiet reception area. A woman at the front desk looked up and smiled. "Mrs. Whitmore, Ms. Keller is expecting you," she said. "Right this way." Susan Keller was already standing when we entered her office, her silver hair neatly pinned back, her expression sharp in a way that felt both familiar and reassuring. "Margaret," she said, extending her hand. "It has been too long." She glanced at Daniel and Claire briefly, then gestured for all of us to sit. "Let us not waste time," she added. I took the chair closest to her desk. Daniel and Claire sat across from us, side by side. Claire placed her portfolio on her lap, unopened. Susan turned to her desk and picked up a sealed manila envelope, already slit open along the top. "This," she said, holding it up slightly, "is the estate addendum your husband executed 6 months before his passing." Daniel leaned forward. "We have already reviewed that document," he said quickly. Susan did not look at him. "No," she replied calmly. "You reviewed a version of it." She opened the envelope fully and removed a set of pages, clipped together neatly. "This is the original, notarized copy filed with my office." The room shifted immediately. Claire's posture tightened just slightly. Daniel frowned. "What do you mean, original?" he asked. Susan placed the document on the desk between us and turned it so I could read the heading. "Addendum to Estate Plan, Conditional Asset Protection Clause," she said. I read the first paragraph slowly, my eyes moving carefully over each line. Then I reached the section that mattered. The clause was clear. If any asset transfers were initiated without my informed, in-person consent, or if any attempt was made to consolidate or reassign ownership during a period of documented vulnerability, all transfers would be automatically voided, and full control of the estate would revert exclusively to me. I looked up. Susan's voice remained steady. "Your husband was very specific," she said. "He anticipated the possibility that someone might attempt to take advantage of timing, particularly after his passing." Daniel sat back, his expression tightening. "That does not apply here," he said. "Everything was signed legally." Susan turned her attention to him for the first time. "Legally," she repeated. "Perhaps, but not in compliance with this clause." She tapped the document lightly. "You initiated transfers within 3 weeks of your father's death. You obtained financial control while your mother was, by your own description, resting and not fully engaged. And you accessed a sealed document that explicitly required her presence." Claire spoke then, her voice controlled but firmer than before. "This clause would need to be validated against current filings," she said. "It is not automatically enforceable without review." Susan gave a small, almost polite nod. "It has already been reviewed," she said. She reached for another document and placed it beside the first. "This is the notarized confirmation filed this morning." I leaned forward, recognizing the timestamp immediately. "Today, all pending transfers initiated without Mrs. Whitmore's direct, informed consent are hereby suspended," Susan read. "Further action will be considered void pending investigation." The words settled into the room like something solid, something that could not be adjusted or reinterpreted. Daniel's voice dropped. "You cannot just stop everything like that," he said. Susan met his gaze evenly. "I just did." Claire's composure held, but there was a stillness to her now that had not been there before. "We will need to review this with our counsel," she said. Susan inclined her head slightly. "You are welcome to," she said, "but I would advise doing so quickly." I sat back in my chair, my hands resting calmly in my lap. For the first time since that morning, the balance in the room had shifted in a way that was not subtle, not implied, clear, documented, final. Daniel looked at me, his voice quieter now. "Mom, you knew about this?" I held his gaze. "Your father made sure I would," I said. Claire closed her portfolio slowly, her movements still precise, but no longer effortless. "This is not over," she said. I met her eyes, steady. "No," I agreed. "It is not." Susan gathered the documents back into a neat stack, aligning them carefully. "There is one more matter we need to address," she said. I turned to her. "What is that?" She looked briefly at Daniel and Claire before returning her attention to me. "The removal of that addendum from the deposit box," she said, "because that action carries its own legal implications. And as her words settled, I realized that stopping them was only the first step. What came next would determine how much they were willing to risk to hold on to what they had already tried to take. The room did not stay quiet after that. It broke, not all at once, but sharply, like something under pressure, finally giving way. Daniel stood up so abruptly that his chair scraped hard against the floor. "Wait a second," he said, his voice rising, no longer controlled. "You are saying everything we did is just void?" Just like that. Susan did not flinch. "I am saying the actions you took triggered a clause your father put in place specifically to prevent this situation," she replied. "And that clause has now been enforced." Daniel turned toward me, his face flushed, confusion, and something sharper underneath it. "Mom, why would you do this?" he demanded. "Why would you go behind us and shut everything down like we were trying to hurt you?" That was the moment something inside me snapped, not quietly, not politely. "Because you were," I said, my voice cutting through the room before I could soften it. I stood up, my hands no longer resting calmly in my lap, but gripping the edge of the desk as I faced him. "You stood in my kitchen this morning and told me not to worry about the details while you signed control over my accounts without me even being present. You transferred my home out of my name while I was still trying to figure out how to live in it without your father. And you want to ask me why I did this?" Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again, his expression shifting from anger to something less certain. Claire did not stand. She stayed seated, but her posture had changed. The control was still there, but it was tighter now, more deliberate. "Margaret," she said, her tone firmer than before, "this is an overreaction. Everything we did was within legal boundaries." I turned to her, the words coming faster now, sharper because they were no longer being held back. "Legal," I repeated. "You call it legal to move a sealed document that require my presence? To have him sign authorizations while I was asleep upstairs? To hand me papers and tell me they were routine when they were anything but—" My voice rose, not out of loss of control, but because it needed to. "That is not help, Claire. That is manipulation." The word landed heavy and clear. Claire's jaw tightened just slightly. "You are interpreting this in the worst possible way," she said. "No, Evia. I am interpreting it the only way that fits the facts." Daniel stepped forward again, his voice lower now, but still strained. "Mom, we were trying to make sure everything was secure," he said. "You were overwhelmed. You needed someone to step in." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for a moment the years between us felt very short. "Then you should have stepped beside me," I said, "not over me." The room held that silence, but it was not empty. It was full of everything that had not been said before. Susan cleared her throat gently, bringing the focus back to the table. "There is another matter we need to address," she said. Claire turned her attention to her, her expression sharpening again. "Which is?" she asked. Susan placed a separate document on the desk, sliding it forward. "The removal of the estate addendum from the safety deposit box," she said. "That action, given the conditions attached to the document, may constitute unauthorized access and interference with estate protections." Daniel's head snapped toward her. "Are you saying we broke the law?" he asked. Susan chose her words carefully. "I'm saying that the circumstances will be reviewed," she replied. "And depending on the findings, there could be consequences." The word hung there, heavier than anything else that had been said. Consequences. Claire leaned back slightly, her fingers tightening around the edge of her portfolio. "We had authorized access to that box," she said. "You had conditional access," Susan corrected, "not unrestricted authority." I could feel my heartbeat now, steady but strong, not from fear, but from the weight of everything finally being said out loud. Daniel looked between us, his voice quieter, almost uncertain. "What happens now?" he asked. Susan glanced at me before answering. "Now," she said, "we determine how far the situation has gone and what actions need to be taken to correct it." I straightened slightly, my hands no longer gripping the desk, but resting firmly at my sides. The shock was still there, the anger too, but underneath it was something else, something clearer, sharper. "No," I said. "Now we decide what I'm going to do about it." Claire met my gaze again, and for the first time since this began, there was no softness left in hers. And what exactly are you planning to do? She asked. I held her eyes, steady, unwavering. That depends, I said, on whether you are ready to tell the truth about everything you moved out of that box, or if I have to prove it myself. And as the words settled between us, I knew the next step would not be about stopping them anymore. It would be about exposing exactly how far they had already gone. Claire did not answer immediately. For the first time since I had met her, since I had welcomed her into this family, there was a crack in the precision of her silence. It was small, but it was there. Dana noticed it too. He turned toward her, his voice lower now, strained in a way I had never heard before. Claire, he said, what is she talking about? Claire kept her eyes on me for a moment longer, then slowly reached into her portfolio and pulled out a thin envelope I had not seen before. She held it between her fingers, not offering it yet. We moved what was necessary to secure the estate, she said. Nothing more. I let out a short, sharp breath that was closer to a laugh than anything else. Then show it, I said. Right now. Daniel stepped closer to her. Claire, just show it, he repeated, this time without hesitation. She looked at him, really looked at him, and something in that exchange shifted again. Not control, not confidence, calculation. Then she placed the envelope on the desk and slid it towards Susan. Fine, she said. Let's be thorough. Susan opened it carefully and pulled out the contents. Several documents, a smaller sealed sleeve, and then a photograph. She set the photograph down first, turning it so we could all see it. It was a picture of Robert, taken in this very house, sitting at the same dining table, holding a document in his hands. I recognized the day instantly. It had been late summer. The light through the window had been warm, golden. He had asked me to make coffee before he called me back in to go over something important, but I had never gone back in. I had gotten distracted. I had forgotten. Susan lifted the document that matched the one in the photograph. This is the full addendum, she said, not just the clause we discussed. She flipped to the final page and placed her finger just beneath Robert's signature. Then she tapped the line below it. A second signature, Claire Whitmore. The room froze. Daniel stared at the page, his voice barely above a whisper. Why is your name on Dad's document? He asked. Claire did not answer him. She looked at me instead. And this time, there was no softness, no careful politeness. Because your husband trusted me, she said, more than he trusted you to handle what would come after. The words hit harder than anything else that had been said. Not because they were true, but because of what they revealed. Daniel stepped back, as if the floor had shifted beneath him. That is not possible, he said. Dad would never. He did. Claire cut in, her voice sharp now. He knew exactly how fragile everything would become after he was gone. He wanted someone who could act without hesitation. I moved before I even realized I had decided to. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us, my hand coming down flat against the desk beside the document. He wanted protection, I said, my voice low but shaking now with something I was no longer holding back. Not replacement. Susan reached for another sheet and slid it forward. There is more, she said. The signature attributed to Claire Whitmore on this document was never notarized through this office. Claire's head turned sharply. What are you implying? She asked. Susan met her gaze without hesitation. I am stating a fact, she said. This signature does not appear in our records, which means it was either added later or it was never legally recognized to begin with. Daniel looked from Claire to the document, then back again. Did you add your name to Dad's will? He asked, his voice breaking now, no longer controlled, no longer careful. Claire did not answer right away, and that silence said everything. Daniel took a step back, his hands lifting slightly in disbelief. Oh my God, he said under his breath. Susan did not raise her voice, but the weight of her words filled the room completely. If that signature was inserted after the document was executed, she said, then we're no longer discussing estate management. We are discussing document tampering. The word landed harder than anything before it. Claire straightened slowly, her composure returning, but it was no longer the same. It was rigid now, defensive. You have no proof of that, she said. Susan reached for the final page in the stack and placed it beside the others. Actually, she said, we do. It was a certification from the notary office. The original record. Only one witness listed. Not Claire. Daniel stared at it, then at Claire, his voice hollow. You lied, he said. She said nothing. And in that silence, everything collapsed. Not quietly. Not slowly. Completely. I straightened, the anger still there, but now it had somewhere to go. Somewhere final. You are done in my house, I said, my voice steady again, but no longer restrained. Both of you. Daniel looked at me, stunned. Mom, no, I said, cutting him off. You chose your position when you stood beside her this morning. I turned to Susan. What happens next? Susan closed the folder calmly. We file for immediate reversal of all transfers, and we refer this matter for formal investigation, she said. I nodded once. Do it. Claire's voice came back then, sharp, desperate for the first time. You think this ends here? She said. You think you just walk away with everything? I met her eyes, unflinching. No, I said. I think you walk away with nothing. And that was exactly what happened. By the end of the week, every account was restored, every transfer voided, and every document they had touched was under review. Claire was formally charged with document tampering and fraud. Daniel lost access to everything he thought he had secured and stood outside the house he grew up in with nothing but what he had carried in. The Lockford changed that same day. I watched from the front window as they stood in the driveway, arguing in low, urgent voices, their plans unraveling in real time. I did not step outside. I did not say another word. I simply turned away, walked back into the house that had always been mine, and closed the door behind me for the last time.